How goes it, YouTube? So, I'm back, and I'm better than ever. Not that I really left, but, you know, I'm back, I guess. So, in today's video, if you read the title, which if you didn't read the title, you are a true fan, my friend, because you're clicking on videos without even knowing what they're about, just because it said see you outdoors. Or you sneezed or fell asleep and you hit a button. I'm okay with that too. I'll take it. Your view counts the same. But if you read the title, you understand that we are doing a European mount on a doe. Now this doe that I shot was about 2 years ago. So it just goes to show you, just because it's been sitting in your freezer for 2 years does not mean that it cannot be Euro mounted. I'm just going to go ahead and tell y'all, I've been wrapped up with other projects and whatnot, and I kind of forgot about it, that it was in the bottom of my freezer, until I shot another deer this year and was like, oh yeah, there's that one still. So that was my first deer that I had ever shot about 2 years ago. It was a small, kind of young doe. Here's actually a Euro mount that I did 7-8 months ago. It was off a dead head. You can actually go back and watch those videos. It was a young buck that died, I want to say sometime around March, April. So it had, of course, no antlers. The antlers had already fallen off, but it still got the pedicles from where the antlers used to be. And then the nose is kind of gnarled up because coyotes and whatnot decided that they wanted to munch on its nose. Other than that, though, I am extremely impressed by the way this one turned out. I'll also flash up a picture here of a squirrel skull that I cleaned. Now, that one was a pain in the butt to an extreme. That one was hard. I boiled it in a kitchen pot. So, like, what I've got here is a big, 5-gallon pot, you know, huge pot. When it came to that squirrel skull, if I boiled it in there and a piece of bone fell off or like a tooth fell out, all the teeth fell out actually in that squirrel, I had to go for like a little kitchen pot so I could have everything confined in a tight space where I knew where it was. And then I had to get basically dental tools. Thankfully, my mother is a dental hygienist, so it worked very well. I had to get dental tools and hand pick off every little piece of flesh on that squirrel. It was a mess. It took forever. I'm going to go ahead and say that this method that I used was in no way, shape, or form fabricated by myself. I learned it from a guy on YouTube by the name of Whitebone Creations. I think his real name is like Ryan Olson or something like that. Awesome guy. Go check out his channel. He taught me everything I know about Euro mounting. Without him, this stuff wouldn't be possible. And I'll just go ahead and say, this is a fun little thing to do. If you want to try it yourself, I'm not necessarily going to do a how-to video on this one. I might do a how-to video on the next Euro mount that I do, which will be coming up hopefully pretty soon. I think I said that about the deadhead, and we never got around to the other ones until now. Stay tuned. I promise. We've got 2 more heads in the freezer, one from a pig, one from a doe, and then, of course, we've always got limitless small game and whatnot. Rabbits, actually, I believe, are harder than squirrels. I've done one rabbit before, and that was even more miserable than the squirrel. I did it, but it was more miserable than the squirrel. Well, enough talking. Seems like it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty and get down to the dirty stuff. Now, quite understandably, the first step to skull cleaning is boiling water. The way that I skull clean is we boil the meat, essentially cook it, and then you hit it with a pressure washer and it blows it right off, like, you know how a chicken breast tears up right after it's boiled? That's essentially what it does to this head. But the boiling is such a soft process that it does not damage the skull whatsoever, which is spectacular. You saw how that one came out, and I've never had a bad result boiling like this. And light the fire. She's ready to rock and roll. We're going to bring that to a boil, and then we're going to pop our skull in. The longest step in this process is either waiting for the water to boil or boiling the skull itself. What do they say? A watched pot won't boil? I'm watching this pot pretty intensely, and it ain't boiling yet. I mean, I've only been here for like 10 minutes, but that's all you should have to wait, right? We live in 2021, for Pete's sake. Everything's supposed to happen instantaneously. Don't you know that, Internet? All right, now that we've brought the water to a boil, it's on a high heat right now. We're going to cut it down to a much lower heat. Roll up our sleeve here. We'll just roll it both. Grab our deer skull out, which has completely thawed. That's another quick tip for you. Make sure your skull is completely thawed. Because like when you try and cook frozen meat, it turns chewy. And the meat on like a deer, when you're trying to clean it, gets really tough and hard to pressure wash off. It's just not a good situation. So make sure your skull is completely thawed before you put it in there. This bad boy though, she's ready to go in. I always go nose down. Don't know why. That's just my personal preference. Now we let it boil. And then what we'll do is we'll check it in a little bit. And what I look for is On the top of the nose, there's a thin little layer of skin. Once that thin little layer of skin splits, it's probably ready to come out. Okay, after about 20 minutes of boiling, this thing is cooked and ready to come out. We're going to set it over here, like so. Let's get the pressure washing, baby. Any day is a good day to be covered in deer brain and water. We've got the deer majoritively clean. There's a couple spots here and there that have little pieces of meat left on there, like one just fell off there. But some of them are still really stuck on. But if I boiled it more in this, I could actually damage the skull, which is something that I don't want to do. So we have a highly toxic, I don't know what you could call it, combination, mixture of things. It is water and liquid peroxide. It is extremely good at whitening things. It can also eat the skin off of you. So you don't want to touch it too much. You also don't want to breathe it in when it starts boiling because it's poisonous. So you stand well clear. Some peroxide. Now this will whiten the bone, and it will also, any meat that's left on there, it'll eat it off. And I'm going to explain more of what we do in a minute. But first, we got to drop it in there. Here you go. You want your whole skull submerged. A lot of times there will be air bubbles trapped in and around the skull, and you want that completely gone. You do not want any air bubbles in your skull. Now what we're going to do with this is we're going to cut the propane back on. The skull's in there before it's boiling. We're going to bring it to a boil, and as soon as it comes to a boil, take that skull out. Because what that product does is it actually will start eating the bone if you wait too long. I've done it before, and it can mess up a bone. Also, I almost forgot to throw the bottom jaw in there. Okay guys, it's starting to get dark, so the camera's going to look a little bit funny. But as you can see, we've pulled them out. They're relatively white. They will whiten a little bit more as soon as they start to dry off a little bit. Now is a good time that if you've got like your little dental tools or something that you can scrape along with, it's a perfect time to go along and just scrape off little pieces, because there are a couple little pieces of meat, but I promise you after all that time in the peroxide, they will come right out. Now, I'm going to pressure wash these off real quick. I'm not going to show it to y'all because y'all have already probably seen enough pressure washing. I'll just hit it with a quick pressure wash, and then we'll show you the finished product after it dries off, because there's a couple more steps that we've got to hit. But it's got to be cleaned off and then let it dry completely. This is one step that you can't rush. You need to make sure it is dry. Okay guys, wrapping it up. The last step to a successful skull clean, in my opinion, is getting some Mop and Glow and just brushing it on. It finishes it off quite nicely. It gives it a little bit of a sheen, but you don't get too much shine. It doesn't look unnatural. And that's kind of what we're going for. We don't want it to look like outlandish and unnatural. We want it to look relatively normal, like a deer skull. We're just going to take some right here and just barely brush it on. This will also give it a nice, pleasant smell, so it's not like outdoorsy smelling while it sits on the wall. And then the reason that I did the bottom half of the skull here, the bottom jaw, on an animal that doesn't have any antlers. So like this animal here would have had antlers, so he's kind of an oddball. I don't know how to make the call on him. But on an animal that doesn't have antlers, I prefer to leave that bottom jaw on. It adds a little something to the skull. The skull's kind of blank without I mean, if it was just that deer head hanging on the wall, it's cool and everything, but when you've got that bottom jaw, it's a little bit different. It draws more than just, oh, that's a doe skull. There she sits with the bottom jaw. We got to let it dry with the mop and glow, but I'm going to close it out here, guys. Thank you for watching, and as always, see you outdoors. Love you guys. This doe does too. Well, she would have, if she had ever known y'all.